And the title of your talk is?
It's to share a little bit about the work of the domestic workers and day laborers here in Chicago.
Some water or tea?
I believe they're bringing me some tea. Thank you so much. Excellent. So thank you, everyone, for just welcoming me here and providing some of your time to hear a little bit about the work that I'm involved with and why and the amazing individuals that I work with. So really quickly, where I come from, we usually go beyond just saying our names and our titles, but we also even talk about a little bit of our family, just to give context. And I think it's important with what I'm going to share with you, this context, so you understand where I'm coming from as I speak openly. So I was born and raised here in Chicago. My family are from Mexico. At a very young age, I even noticed a difference between my mom and my dad, even in Mexico, as far as my mom and her side of the family had a fewer generations in Mexico. So they look very Spaniard, very, green eyes, blonde hair. And my dad, indigenous to the Yaqui tribe. And so, thank you so much. So they migrated here in Chicago in the 70s. My oldest brother, Carlos, was born. And he was born also with a mental developmental condition. And when they returned to Mexico, years had gone by and he has grown up. And Mexico had not at those times provide the services that my parents needed. By then, my middle brother, Marcelo, was born. So my oldest, Carlos, middle brother, Marcelo, they migrated back. I was born in 1982 and grew up in the Humboldt Park neighborhood in Chicago. And so growing up, I saw my dad start off as a day laborer himself, developed a respiratory illness, and then my mom was the breadwinner while my dad continued to raise me and my brothers. Growing up, I had to, I experienced sort of the realities of undocumented families because we were half. I was born here, my oldest brother was born here, but my middle brother and my parents were undocumented. Growing up, seeing my dad raising us, even with his condition, doing the best he could with cooking and cleaning while my mom was working. And she took over as a domestic worker. So in the 80s, domestic workers are making possibly $3, $4 minimum wage. I don't know if folks can remember definitely better than I can. And at 11, so as my dad and I spent most of the time together, he took me to the park and to the local forest and taught me through nature. And I like to say that he introduced me to society at 12, before other elements in the neighborhood became my mentors. So he got me involved with a leader in Humboldt Park called Lucy Gomez, and she had mentored many, many young people over the years. Lucy Gomez introduced me to Gallery 37. I saw a mural made by Gallery 37, and Gallery 37 in the 90s was brought to Humboldt Park as well. And that allowed me and other young people from that neighborhood to leave the neighborhood, to have relationship with the Chicago Park districts and the museums. And then the second year, the second summer I spent with her, I started my relationship with her at 12, 13, was interning also and got involved with the Shedd Aquarium. So just fast forwarding really quickly, growing up with individuals with special needs, like my dad and my brother. I remember also at 10 years old doing my first wage theft case without even knowing, and that's basically as young people you have to translate for everything that you do for your parents. And I remember my mom asking me to support her calling one of her employers who hadn't paid her for a month. So, at 10, I don't really know this, but I'm doing my best to interpret. Little did I know that I would be doing that again at 21 as work. So fast forwarding with Lucy Gomez, I was really being developed and mentored to go into marine biology with the support even with the Shedd Aquarium that she was also helped me create a relationship there. So these experiences again, allowed me to leave the neighborhood, see a different perspective. And then at 21, things changed a couple years before 21, but when I was in school and working at the shed, still going towards science, September 11 happened, 2001, and tourism for a time stopped in Chicago. I remember flights stopped for a while, and the Shed Aquarium laid off pretty much all its young people, part-timers, and I was one of those. But that's when my life changed, and that's when I really got introduced to Latino Union. And that was founded by a leader called Jose Landaverde, immigrant rights leader. And that was my introduction to day laborers, domestic workers, and even the conversation deeper of undocumented. Although I grew up with my parents who were undocumented and one of my brothers, it's not a typical conversation we have. They try to give you the most normal life, and these conversations about we're undocumented really didn't come up at all. And so it wasn't until working at Latino Union that helped me develop my own analysis where I was able to bring these conversations to our own kitchen table. And started to ask my mom and my father questions about their more deeply and more detailed about life as a day laborer for my dad and how he developed the respiratory illness that he got that disabled him. And my mom as a domestic worker and seeing the realities of that and getting more context, like, wow, yeah, I remember translating for you plenty of times about employers not paying you. And here I am now as a volunteer at Latino Union at 21 doing that work, mostly of recovering unpaid wages. So the individuals that I specifically started working with starting at 21 to this day are the day laborers that we see at Home Depots, or about now 8 street corners spread out through the Chicagoland area. Furthest one is 92nd and Western. Furthest one north, I believe, is in like about Devon and Kimball. And each street corner has its own dynamics, and it also represents the neighborhood a little bit more. We're very segregated in this part of the country, Chicago especially. And so that you'll even see that with the street corners, either very specific African Americans or Eastern European, even with Latin America, you just see like the people from Honduras in a very specific street corner, or Mexico and another. When I started at Latino Union, our work, it was sort of historic moments for organizing this informal sector that wasn't even organized by the unions. Unions, when I first started working with the day laborers, trying to recover their wages, naturally you'll go to an attorney, you'll go to the unions, you'll go to the Department of Labor, you go to Attorney General. None of them understood the realities of workers who are not a permanent worker, who might be undocumented. Who is your employer if you are hired through a staffing agency? Is it the warehouse? Is it the staffing agency? So early on in our work, in improving the conditions for these type of workers was understanding what rights they didn't have, and work from there as far as creating new laws. So over these years, we've passed very important, really good laws to protect these workers, to formalize a very informal industry, very dangerous industry. I'm going to jump a little bit here, but the other sector we work with, and it was a dream come true for me, because at one point I became the executive director at Latino Union and was able to introduce this new sector of workers to support this base, which are the domestic workers, the workers who do house cleaning, caregiving, who are nannies. And a couple of statistics that we found out as we were working with UIC and UCLA and these national studies on these industries is that, for example, for day laborers, and this gave me context as far as what was happening with my own family, for wage theft, there's a 66% chance that you won't be paid what you originally negotiated with your employer. $7.2 million of unpaid wages in these combined as far as informal labor sectors, $7.2 million of unpaid wages on a weekly basis. in the Chicago area. And this study was done in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. So each city has its own statistics. It's an epidemic. It's slave labor. It's free, labor. I'm sorry? This study was done with Nick Theodore. That was probably 6 years ago or so. And so one is we did specifically for day laborers. The Midwest was the worst region, the most dangerous region, the most risky region for day laborers. Domestic workers, if you could imagine, and this is what sort of broke my heart, even not having to go into detail to ask my mom, but it gave me a reality check of as far as the isolation that these domestic workers work in. If you could imagine, right? You're undocumented, you work at a home, and you're alone, and nobody really knows what's happening. And the rates of sexual violence against them, this is so bad, and that there's a national movement, National Domestic Worker Alliance. It's a national network of now to probably 50, 60 organizations like us who've come together and created a national network, basically. And so the domestic workers created one, and the street corner day laborers created the National Day Labor Organizing Network and the Domestic Workers Alliance. So these are two national powerhouses. It's our version of the AFL-CIO. It's the best we can, right? So through that, New York started for the domestic workers a movement which was the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. I did not know that when the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed in 1938, there was negotiations between the northern and southern states in this country about bringing these new labor basic protections, right, to all of us. I did not know that the South and North negotiated that you have to exclude 2 labor sectors if we're going to go along with this, right? The southern states negotiated. You have to exclude the workers in our homes and the workers in the fields. So all these years later, guess what? That still stands. We haven't even changed that nationally. So each state has battled. There's about 8, 9 states that have passed it. We were the 7th. It took us 5 years to lobby and pass this, while Quinn was in office for years, for a while, for those several years. And it wasn't until Rauner's first year where there was like this battle in Springfield about who's more kinder to the poor. We took advantage of it. Some local paper wrote about there's a maid and butler's bill being pushed. Our bill was called a Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, and they named it that. But we took advantage of that and said, oh yeah, so who's the nicer one? And they passed it. Rauner signed it. Amazing. When I would walk with domestic workers, people like my mom, to Springfield and talk about the realities, the workers saying, I've been harassed, all type of stuff, right? Not paid, abused. And it triggered all of us. I mean, they would cry. And you're talking to Democrats, right, who have the majority. I thought I was talking to a whole different political, Republicans or something, conservatives. And some of them will tell you upright in front of you, like, no, or my dad has a care worker. I don't want him to go to jail if he's harassing her. Like, just not thinking, right? And so we are, in those 5 years, this movement escalated to push that law. I mean, we brought out stories, everything we could to make them look terrible if you don't support something so basic like that. And it took us taking advantage of a separate battle that they were having between themselves and use it against them to pass this law, instead of them really understanding the realities. Hawaii has passed this law, so other states have. And so for the very first time, when I was reading and understanding about the laws and these rights, the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights was simply saying, here is everybody in this country, their rights. These are the domestic workers and the workers, the farm workers. All that the domestic workers want is equal rights. They're not asking for more, nothing like that, just equal. That meant you're amending current labor law. Because as we was reading for example, the Illinois Human Rights Act about the workers' rights to work in an environment free of sexual violence, they literally write in excluding these sectors. So our bill was literally just erasing that and amending it. That's all it was. And it took 5 years to convince these folks. And then you have the Department of Labor, whose only role is to enforce. Why are they going out there and talking against it? Oh, this is going to cost us more money. So what? If it's going to cost you more money, we'll figure it out, right? But to put that excuse to help stop a movement to just give them equal rights. So for day laborers, domestic workers, taxi drivers, farm workers, southern workers who work in like fisheries, you have other sectors I'm forgetting. There's about 2 more.
Meat workers?
I'm sorry?
Meat packers?
Meat packers, exactly, for sure. These are the sectors that are growing in this country. We're losing the traditional work that we've had, right? The permanent work, you're a full-time worker with you're an employee, you have your wages, your hourly wages, you have insurance. It's coming into these informal sectors. And it's the Wild West in each of those sectors. I gave you a taste of the domestic workers. That's what each of those sectors are going through. And all they want is equal. It's about catching up the standards where OSHA can't go and see the safety of a house, right? The safety conditions. They could go to a factory in other places, right? So there's limits. There's holes in the systems of basic regulations, so people are not dying, right? Or working for free. And so that is what, at 21, getting like a reality of all that, because when my first day just volunteering at Latino Union was coming to the middle of a campaign of a lot that is at Pulaski and Foster. This is 2003, spring. I'm 20, actually, not even 21. They tell me just show up there. I show up, I'm looking, there's 200 men that look like my dad. These are street corner day laborers who've organized and taken over that land, that property. Because months before, they negotiated with the local alderwoman, Laurino, and about saying, hey, we're 200 men congregated all over this neighborhood, waiting for employers to pick us up. We're organized where we created basic understandings with each other and agreements about rates. We're not going to compete against each other, about how we approach the employer, about how we stay together. And so they provided them a space that later on didn't go with her sort of goals with the neighborhood. This is in front of Gompers Park. She said, we want that lot as an addition to the park. That meant that she just want to see them no more, right? So they said, shutting us down is like shutting down a factory in the neighborhood. We all live and reside here. We're organized. We have rules. They fundraise amongst themselves and bought materials to build a shelter, porta potties they rented, so they have that there, and volunteer contractors and employers will give materials. They had a little library. They had a bunch of stuff going on there, and a system about how to distribute work amongst themselves. Employers will pull in, negotiate with the worker, pull out. It's safety because we all see where the worker is going. If there's any issues, there's an agreement. So they try to shut it down. The workers and the allies, the volunteers take it over, and we're there pretty much the entire summer, protesting and pressuring the city to provide that space to the workers. This is my schooling. That's my university. So much so that I stopped my school, my actual schooling. And I saw this as the most immediate way to improve the conditions of my own household and with the people who I knew growing up. And the other schooling that's really important is understanding the pros and cons of the nonprofit industrial complex involved in our movements. And I was introduced for the very first time into the nonprofit world as a volunteer, as the very first paid organizer for that organization, and later on as the executive director. So I saw the different levels. I saw what it meant to sustain an organization. How do you sustain and fundraise, which I didn't go into yet, but after this struggle with the city, they kicked everybody, and I'll get back to this here, but they kicked us all out. And we had to start from scratch. All these workers are, again, separated out, like on a neighborhood. As I'm the first paid organizer, because with all this intention, we've decided to become a non-for-profit. Foundations wanted to throw money at us. They're like, here, this is amazing what you guys are doing. They hire me as the first paid organizer. My role is to reorganize all the workers. We get enough funding to make a decision. Do you want to continue battling with the city to ask for a space? Or do you want to just open up your own space? And that's what we did. We established a very first hiring hall for day laborers in the Midwest. And that was great because we basically implemented what they decided on the street to this storefront. We went from the local business association calling the police on the workers to now inviting us to the table because now we have a storefront. That planted a seed, and I'll get to that later, but that planted a seed in my head like, oh, that's how this works. And so my role went from the street corner and organizing to now implementing the systems and programming in this worker center and the structure and working with the day laborers because it was a space like this. Imagine 60, 70, 80 men on a daily basis and waiting for work. And how are we going to do this? It went from the street corner, we're advertised. They know who we are. Now you're in a storefront. How do you get all those employers who knew you from there to the storefront? You now have to put a business cap on. So here I'm social justice organizing to business cap. Like I have to now understand how do we get employers. So that was amazing experience. Against new schooling. Implementing that program, how do I get these individuals, imagine you all day laborers, occupied. You're waiting here for about 8 hours. We're together, we're seeing, hoping employers come and pick you up. While you're waiting, ESL classes, know your rights classes, health and safety courses. We're gonna take ideas, put them on a wall about how we're gonna promote this place, right? That's what was happening. Leadership development. I learned about negotiation and contracting because I'm now the coordinator at that center. Now I have to be the middle person from that contractor, homeowner, with the worker. How did this place work? I wanna hire a day laborer. What do you do? Like, and you have to explain that, right? You have to explain about, here's a piece of paper, which is a very basic contract, one-sided. This is why you should fill it out. It's a safety for everybody. We went from 66% chance of not being paid to 0% of zero wage theft at that worker center. If an employer did not want to fill out that thank you, have a nice day. That's it, as simple as that. So one simple piece of paper, basic stuff, changed everything there. And so this is happening, right? Something so amazing is happening. Why isn't the city there? Like, right? Why isn't important people in our society there kind of understanding that to see what changes can we do basic that don't cost much to change a bunch of stuff here, a whole sector. So how do you fundraise and continue to fundraise for that? So that's where I'm going into now, understanding the nonprofit thing. Here I am with business, social justice, contract, construction, terms and stuff, to the grants and fundraising and the site visits with foundations. Going to their events in downtown, rubbing elbows far from what I'm doing with mentalities who are somewhere else. How do you do that? My next schooling. Understanding languages. Understanding how to write a grant in 3 languages. Not English, Spanish, and all that. No, I'm saying the very conservative foundations, the middle of the road foundations, and the very progressive foundations. This worker center for the very progressive, after a campaign with the city, the workers organized, forget the city, we're implementing our own leadership development programming here, we're doing our own thing. They love that. You're from the grassroots up, perfect. Conservative. This is workforce development. They're getting trained. They got the health and safety trainings, right? The conservative. These are poor people who need our help. Look at them. Look how poor and vulnerable they are. You talk more about the statistics of the vulnerability and that stuff. And that you're providing a service. What services are you giving them? So you go from here, what tools for leadership development and self-determination, here, services. Here, kind of a combination of the both in the middle. That was my next schooling, right? That burnt me out. And it burned all of us out. That, I remember literally, it's almost entering a vortex of me leaving my innocence behind of what my dad taught me through nature, understanding, and it sort of got cut short for a moment as far as understanding who I am, understanding what a human being is, human, the physical being, the spirit. We're physical spirits, our connection to Mother Earth. Everything has being. Everything has energy. That disappeared from me for a long time. And my father passed away that same year I became the executive director. I couldn't mourn him. I couldn't process that. It took me burning out after 13 years and the new leadership coming in and saying, I would rather just step down as ED and become just an organizer, get back to the base, because by then I was just, again, rubbing elbows with people I don't want to rub elbows with and work with. And the very last thing that my development director did, because she was burnt out and she moved with her partner to San Francisco, was getting me a sabbatical, the very first one I've ever had in my life, time off, that with an organization called Wind Call. And Wind Call has been around for 30 years, low-key, and they provide 21 days of rest with no structure in the middle of nature, with somebody coming in and cooking for you, all your meals, organic stuff grown there locally. The only rule is leave everything, your work, family, technology. You're in the middle of nature where technology doesn't even work. I was at the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, and I have photos later I could show you guys. And Eve have seen this one photo. Everybody have seen it. It's sort of my version of my little Bible that I walk with to remind myself about who I am and my connection to spirit and Mother Earth and my ancestors. But there is where, on a daily basis, I would hike for a mile, sit under the tree, and realize that I had chosen one with a bald eagle nest and was able to reconnect again with my youth and how my dad taught me to sit and observe. That's how I learned about everything, was to observation. And I saw the two eagles, and there was a hatchling because they kept feeding the how do you call it, baby bald eaglet, and seeing them go and fish and come back. I saw the famous little hook that they do together. I would hear and recorded the eaglet, screaming out. Seals would just pop up and peek at you and go back down, and a bunch of stuff, just nature, right, as it should be. And I took random pictures to send to my mom, and on the Mexican date of Mother's Day Center, a couple barely got to her. Barely a text back came, and she said, "Hey, did you notice one of the pictures you sent me?" I'm like, "What?" And I noticed that there was a special image there, and it was my father that popped up on one of the images through the trees. Trees that the property owners had planted in that property to help them get back to their property, because everything looks the same. You get lost there. So that reset me. That said, okay, it brought me full circle. It's almost like I left home and came back and reconnected with all my ancestors, created my own practices, because we have them within ourselves too. You just have to listen to yourselves. I remembered that I carry thousands of years of indigenous knowledge in my own DNA, as well as you all. We all do. And that it's about listening and disconnecting from everything so that you get to the roots of who we are as natural things here, beings. And those 21 days helped cement that. And I haven't been the same at all since then. It's been 3 years, because this was 2016 that I went. And when I came back, the new leadership with the organization didn't recognize me. The way I talked about things, though, I realized that a bunch of stuff that we're taught in social justice movement, it's not right, I don't feel. I feel that it disconnects us. I feel that it confuses us. I think we confuse power with authority, for example. I believe that power starts in our heartbeat, electrical impulses to our brain. Our brain says these electrical waves to the universe, which is our clear, coherent thinking, our creativity, our thoughts. That's power, the ability to inspire and move people. That's power. To force people to accept something is authority. That's different. And so as social justice movement, we said we want political power, or you need finances to have power. That's not. You want forms of authority. That's not power. You're already neutralizing yourselves because you don't understand your own power. And then it's not about revolution, it's about evolution. How do we evolve? How do we stay connected to the natural way of things, which evolve? So the people who really wanted me to come back differently and were rooting for me was the base, because I worked with them. By then, I already knew some 13 years. Somehow I met at the street corner when I was 20 years old. Men who I saw strong construction workers, now kind of just tired out. And they were happy for me. And there was a division within the organization. The organization and the new leadership stayed with the organization, its name and the funding, everything we built. But I took the 13 years of knowledge, the base, and the spirit. I said it's an equal trade. It's an equal thing. Keep it. We founded then the Domestic Worker and Day Labor Center of Chicago. It's been 3 years. I have seeked out 0 grants. And I now work at WinCall because I help them fundraise a little bit to be able to engage with the 500 amazing leaders who have gone through that. Over the 30 years. This year is the 30th anniversary. We're going to be having, hopefully in the fall, a gathering of people who care about the topic of what is the state of our movements and people burning out. What do we need to for self-care and recentering? Our office is on Lawrence and Kimball, the heart of Albany Park, where I started my work. We have strategic relationships with people who share sort of our way of thinking, and this is Centro Autónomo on Lawrence and Kimball, who are very self-determined organizations, self-sustained. At Latino Union, with these seeds that I said were planted, so like the worker center and you know the business associations, I didn't mention that we experimented the last sort of few years there that I was there. I was already thinking about self-sustainability. It's not good to be a movement and sustained by foundations. That's not how it's going to happen. As soon as the money is done, is the organizers still going to be there? And so we started experimenting with a coffee roasting cooperative called Cafe Chicago. We were able to put our products in about 35 grocery stores. We partnered up only with women-owned cooperatives in Rwanda and El Salvador, Guatemala, Chiapas, a bunch of places, and roasted the coffee beans with our own roasting machine at Dark Matter on Western and Chicago Avenue. And we learned the coffee industry. We challenged it so they could become more progressive. They think they have progressive missions. They don't. But it taught us something as an organization, as a movement. So we took that knowledge. When we founded our new organization, we continue building a local movement of other organizations thinking about, and movements thinking about self-sustainability. How are you going to continue this work when the funding, or how do you diversify your funding then? And it's called the Illinois Worker Cooperative Alliance. We just passed a very historic law for Illinois. It's a co-op law, state law. Now you can incorporate your business as a co-op. And you could incorporate it that way. It gives you recognition as far as your structure, and we're trying to get benefits for people who start worker-owned co-ops. But this is our version of the offense. Our defense, recovering unpaid wages. I didn't even get to immigration. Well, I'll get to in a quick second here. And other labor issues. So what's the offense? What's the future? If you're only working as a day laborer, you have nothing permanent. What's your retirement? I'm seeing these workers again. I met now. It's been 16 years that I know these men and women, and what are they going to do? And their kids are growing up. And so many of them want to be independent and want to start their own businesses together collectively. And so cooperatives do that. So it was a very long-term strategic vision that we had. Let's create the structure we need with the state, city, and county. And then at the meanwhile, we're training ourselves on worker-owned cooperatives and business ownership of that type, business plans and all these stuff and ideas, so they could all come together. And our goal is to sustain our work through our own means, through our own cooperatives. I would love to start a cooperative with some of our members, basically, and sustain myself in the work that we do. We have 9 programs without any funding or any grants. That includes the outreach to the street corners, the domestic workers, recovering unpaid wages and other labor issues. We're strongly involved in a local movement on stopping sexual violence. And then the immigration. We have about over 10 cases of people fighting their deportations. And that's the challenge here, where when you're doing this work, you don't know if the people you're developing are going to be around. Or you have to also deal with their traumas that they're going through. Today starts what? What's today for them? Anybody know? The raids.
Yeah, oh yeah, already.
Right? This morning. So after this, I'm going back into the neighborhood to see what's up, where there's like little brigades of people just walking around and trying to see if anything is happening and making sure that we get out the important information. So I know definitely that we'll be having some new cases pretty soon. We are part in that neighborhood in Albany Park, have the Albany Park Defense Network of local groups and churches. It's been around now for 2 years. We basically brought the community to that network, and we developed a case committee and worked with a local organization of attorneys, a nonprofit of attorneys called Kala, and they're the ones who help us with these cases while we do the organizing work on the ground. So they do the legal stuff, but we do the organizing stuff. And then we combine it. When it's court time, the whole community comes, right? And that puts an impression of the judge, because typically people there are alone in court. They're not necessarily come with a whole community of people. So I'll leave it at that. There's a lot I skipped over, but there's so much detail. I jump back and forward, but I want to give some time if people have questions. Yeah, I could see if I could pop one up. But in the meanwhile, if people have any questions or thoughts, yes.
Okay. I've been involved with the Evangelical Synagogue and domestic workers' rights, but you have to put it in a larger context, because I'm someone who had to hire someone to take care of my husband who has dementia.
Sure.
And I'm really angry that on any of the debates, and I'm for free pre-K and free college, no one is talking about disabled people or elderly people. And if I were to hire on my own, my husband now can't pay home at all, a domestic worker and pay even minimum wage, and I would like to pay more, 15 times 24 times 365. how can an average person who makes like $40,000 a year do that?
Exactly.
And how many years of savings do any of us have to do that?
Exactly.
So we need to, I mean, there is something called caring across
Exactly.
generations.
So, yep. And I'm glad you brought that up, because those are important little details in campaigns that I always feel bad when we have like a certain amount of time and I can't get into, but so happy you brought that up. Because yes, with the domestic workers, even in a national movement, and we learned this also locally with day laborers and domestic workers, and especially when we opened up the hiring hall, you have to develop a relationship and understanding with the employer side. You have to, even when you're passing a law, everything. Because we're in it together. And we're in it together because it's a capitalist system, and that's how it works as far as business and relationships, employer-employee, but also as a society, and especially when it comes with care. And that's very sensitive to me because I grew up where, and I still actually live with to support them, my mom and my brother. So this caring across generation was basically the domestic workers nationally saying, we have to engage the employer side, the families, the caregiving industry, the agencies, and figure out what is broken and how do we fix this. And when you develop your analysis, you go into these questions about there's different levels of care and people in economic levels and how care looks like. And here I am from a very low income, undocumented family with these needs. So we're on the employer side, right? Because we need care for my own family members. Here I am fighting for the rights to improve the conditions for the actual worker. So I'm like right in the middle. And it made me realize that's true. And sometimes my mom has to hire help. She was making, by the time she retired, $12 an hour? For a caregiver agency? So, and so the relationships that you have to have also. So it's, my God, and Caring Across Generation is this campaign where it combined both sides to have these conversations, to brainstorm together. Of course, it didn't resolve everything right there and then, but you're working at it. You're supporting each other and each other's campaigns. One, to not stop Social Security benefits and other benefits. The other side, supporting workers' rights, And you have 5 pillars that they supported. I forgot the statistics. Every something seconds, 7, 8, 10 seconds, there's a new baby boomer retiring. So the need and the gap between the care and the caregivers is going to be big in this country.
Yeah, Ajen Poo's book, Age with Dignity, is she talks about that. So Ajen Poo has been one of the key people in forming the National Domestic Workers Alliance, but also starting the Caregiving Across Generations campaign because of what I and Erik are talking about, because it's both sides that are affected, and if you're middle class, there's less supports for help with caregiving than if you're Medicaid eligible, and in Maine they introduced a bill that was included elder care and child care in the same bill to support middle-class families to be able to have both. And I think the campaign's still small in Illinois. Last time I talked to them, they were just starting, but
yeah.
I've been through that myself. I know, and it's huge. And Ina's absolutely right. I think we do need to press the people running for office now to talk about.
Definitely.
What was the name of that book?
Age with Dignity.
Thank you.
And it's Ajen Poo.
She's the Executive Director of the Domestic Worker Alliance. That network of domestic workers was chosen as Time's 100 influential people.
Yeah, Ajen Poo got a MacArthur Award.
And how about along with free pre-K and free college,
Exactly.
free respite care, for, because I couldn't have caregivers 24/7, how about giving, the family that's taking care of the person.
Exactly.
A break once a month or something.
Exactly.
Can you say the name of the organization? It was
Caring Across Generations is the campaign.
It's a campaign.
Yeah, it's a campaign, a national campaign, started by the Domestic Worker Alliance, and then Jobs with Justice is a national group also that combines unions and our type of organization, worker centers. It was a national campaign that they started, and it was to help trigger also support for the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. So when we started the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights campaign in Chicago, we first started the Caring Across Generation campaign because that helped us bring the important allies to the table.
Enough people, you get a big swath of people?
As far as in Chicago, bringing in all the important, how do you call these folks? Not players, I guess you can't. Stakeholders.
Yeah.
Thank you. Gosh, I'm already forgetting this.
Yeah.
Stakeholders. Exactly. You know, that's me trying to let go of the nonprofit stuff.
Yeah.
That terminology stuff, man.
Yeah.
Gosh.
What language are we in?
So with all of the immigrants coming in, assigned identity numbers or whatever, I hate to use that phrase,
All right,
but it's a reality.
Yeah.
It sounds like Nazi Germany. It really does. These people are getting dispersed throughout the U.S. I think they can go basically into hiding. There are many now in Chicago, so your numbers are going to increase. Can you talk a little bit about this influx?
Of people just coming in
And its impact on what all the things you're doing? Or not?
That's a good question. It's interesting. It's interesting because, and it kind of may sometimes take time to see it, but at some point, what was happening, and I'll just say really quickly, and I'll use the street corner day laborers and what I was observing on the streets is that when I first started, packed. Street corners were packed, man, and a lot of work. So this is 2003. That's where the timeline is starting. So I would say for several years, until we hit that bubble with the housing stuff. Because
2007.
there you go, right? Because now the homeowners who will come and hire, or the hire contractors will come hire the day laborers, no more. So a lot less work. And it took time, a little bit of time, where I saw the number of individuals and what happened to the street corner. We went from 3 major street corners that were bustling, like a lot of work. People would go work 2 times. They would start the first very early shift and come back and be hired for a moving job or something. And then it went from and working every day to working 3 to 4 days. And then you start seeing the new street corners pop up because there was just 200 workers at one place with very limited work. So they started popping up a little bit more. That's how we got to about 8 street corners now. It was just 3 major ones, and now we have 8. At some point, I noticed, and to this, I still see now, I don't think the street corners have recovered, especially the major one in Albany Park. There's a lot less workers, a lot less out there. And I feel that people have just moved and done other things. What also has happened is that some have moved to the local suburbs. What really has, and it just depends on the industry, because with the warehouse workers, here in Illinois, we have I believe the highest number of warehouse workers because of the train system we have here. Walmart and its warehouses especially, I believe the number is over 300,000 workers on a daily basis go through the staffing agencies and into the warehouse work. And there's a movement of Warehouse Workers for Justice and the Chicago Workers Collaborative, these 2 organizations that specifically have their niche in organizing warehouse workers, for example, and workers from the staffing agencies. So those numbers are kind of the same. We do see fear. I know when I go to the neighborhood, I won't see them around. So the whole neighborhood just disappears. It just gets quiet. So it just kind of depends,
But Erik, when you were talking about people moving, though, I think one of the things that's been happening is people have been being priced out of where they're living.
That's another thing. Exactly right. Gentrification in Albany Park and Pilsen, and other areas.
I mean, in my, North Center, so I was talking to this guy who opened a Mexican restaurant on Western near Montrose, and he was at 18th and Ashland before,
Yeah.
which at one point was, you know, the heart of the immigrant community in Pilsen, and he told me that he got, the rent was doubling, and you know, I was amazed that it was, he said, so he was having to pay $500 a month more in North Center, but you know, North Center is gentrified. I was amazed that he could, but he said it's a lot less than he would have been paying if he stayed at 18th and Ashland.
Yeah, Latino Union, our headquarters originally, when I first started, was at Pilsen, 19th and Ashland, and we moved out, you know, pricing. You had another question?
¿Puedes ayudarme a traducir?
Sí, por supuesto que sí.
Buenos días, yo soy de acá del grupo, vengo a meditar.
Good morning, I'm here, I'm part of the group, I come to meditate.
Yeah.
Mi inglés es...
My English is not so well.
Yo vivo acá en Opar hace como 7 años.
I've now lived here in Oak Park for 7 years.
Yo soy trabajadora doméstica hace 14 años.
I am also a domestic worker for 14 years.
Actualmente cuido niños y también limpio casas.
I take care of kids and also clean homes.
Y acá en Opar, la realidad es que yo me he encontrado con muchas cuidadoras de niños.
And here in Oak Park, the reality is that I've come and met many domestic workers, nannies specifically.
Que son latinas o de otros países, ¿no? De México y diferentes países. De habla hispana.
Some are Latinas and various places of Latin America.
Y muchas están legales y otras están ilegales.
So some are documented, some are undocumented.
Es decir, acá en Opar tenemos muchos ejemplos de muchas personas trabajadoras domésticas que limpian casas y que cuidan niños y que están cerca de nosotros.
And so here we have a lot of examples near us in our own area here of domestic workers who are cleaning homes and caring for kids.
Ahora estoy trabajando part-time con la colaboración Early Childhood.
I now work part-time with Early Childhood. ¿Es una organización?
Sí,
It's an organization.
La colaboración trabaja acá en Oak Park.
And it also does work collaboratively here in Oak Park.
Las oficinas están en la villa de Oak Park.
And then it's the villas para el tren.
La municipalidad, acá en la villa.
Oh, the municipality here in Oak Park.
Y ellos tratan de ver los problemas de las familias para conectarse con las que tienen niños pequeños, menos de 5 años.
So they try to connect and provide services and support for families, young families, basically families with young kids.
Entonces, en ese trabajo me ha hecho posible yo poder conocer a muchas nannies porque trabajo en los parques, haciendo conexión con ellas, y entonces ahí hemos podido hacer contacto, entonces esa es la realidad, ¿no?
And so a lot of her work is outreaching. So she goes to the parks and outreaches to these nannies who are out there and connects with them.
La colaboración está tratando de hacer al futuro un proyecto de poder juntar a las trabajadoras domésticas, tanto de limpiar y también, o sea, trabajadoras domésticas son 3 cosas, ¿no? Los que cuidan adultos, los que cuidan niños y los que limpian casas.
And so they have a vision to also get together the domestic workers for the 3 sectors that she broke them down again, the caregivers, the nannies, and the house cleaners.
Entonces la colaboración en el futuro va a tratar de ayudar a las trabajadoras domésticas para entrenarlas para que puedan formar un grupo acá en Oak Park, ¿no?
Nice. And then they want to basically collaborate with these domestic workers to provide them the tools to train them so that they could be active here in Oak Park.
Eso es todo.
And that is all. Thank you so much. So that's beautiful to see. That's what she said is exactly sort of the formula that we use nationally, right here in Chicago, and so beautiful to see in Oak Park, of going to the basics. And that's when you outreach and being strategic of where does a nanny go? Well, they'll take them to the museums, they'll take them to the parks, they'll take them to the grocery store, so being very strategic about that. And then for caregivers, do you go to the caregiver agencies or, you know, where do you go for that? But that's really great. Qué bueno, gracias por compartir. In the United States or in Oak Park?
No, the United States.
Dice, ¿cuánto tiempo tienes en los Estados Unidos?
14 años.
14 years. Yeah. Any other?
So do either of you have ideas about maybe what we can do as allies and what we can do as a center and as a place that can offer at least respite and space to reflect?
So, pregunta Eve si hay algo que ambos grupos podemos pedir de personas que están interesadas de apoyar, de ser aliados, y qué son ideas que podemos tú y yo traer a personas como ellos de cómo pueden apoyar, ¿verdad?, el trabajo de tratando de mejorar las condiciones para las trabajadoras domésticas, por ejemplo.